Shri Ram Jai Ram. Ramayana. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Paramajakacharya Asta Sarasata Shishiman His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. You can never get enough of the chanting. It's never enough. It's never enough. Krishna. Here we are, Ramayana. And it's an English rendition in a condensed form of a Tamil translation of Valmiki Sanskrit, Ramayana. But it reads easily, and we can follow the pastimes and activities of this incarnation, Sitaram. At this point, an alliance has been made with Sugriva, who has now been installed as the king of the Vanaras after dethroning his brother. It was an unfortunate incident, but that's the way it played out. They could have been friendly and ruled the kingdom together, but each one had a difficulty. One had, in a very subtle way, greed and desire to outdo the other one. And then the other brother, when that played out, that small seed of greed played out, he became angry. And so they both became overcome by their difficulties. One overcome by rage and anger, and the other had this creeping kind of lustful desire to usurp the kingdom for himself. Nothing was particularly overt, it just played out like that, and they couldn't work together, and Vali ended up being the brother that was slain. So Sugriva is now the king of the Vanaras, and he has vowed his help to Ram and Lakshman to find Sita. So this is chapter 45, Anger and Reconciliation. The rainy season began. Sugriva and his companions spent the time in Kishkinda, that was their country, in enjoyment. But Ram and Lakshman spent the weary days waiting in a cave nearby. The forest paths were flooded and became rushing torrents impossible to traverse. The search for Sita therefore had to be suspended. Ram brooded over Sita's predicament and was plunged in sorrow. Lakshman counseled him to bear with the delay till the rainy season ended, and Ram held himself in patience. The edge of the keenest sorrow wears with time, and perhaps heaven's kindest gift to men are sleep, for the fleeting cares of the day and forgetfulness of the deep-seated injuries of the heart. Kishkinda mourned Vali for a time, and then rejoiced in Sugriva and the survivors. Sugriva forgot the privations of his exile and the remorse for his brother's death. He enjoyed to the full his present prosperity, and even Tara reconciled and adapted herself to altered circumstances in the interest of her son. The son was to inherit the kingdom. The royal palace of Kishkinda was full of joy and drinking, and the gloomy months of rain which the Raghu brothers spent in leaden repining sped with golden-winged enjoyment for Sugriva and his household. Only Hanuman felt anxious. He could not forget Ram's business. He was looking out for an opportunity to remind the king of his pledge to Ram. At last, the rains ceased. The sky was cleared of cloud and lightning. The air was sweet with the perfumes of flowers, songs of birds, and joy came to life in the forest again. The intelligent and highly virtuous Hanuman now approached his king. Sugriva had entrusted all his official duties to the ministers and was absorbed in pleasure. Hanuman knew that the wisest and best of men neglect their promises in such circumstances, and addressed the king with great politeness. You have regained the kingdom of your ancestors and are in secure possession and enjoyment of it. But something yet remains to be done. You must fulfill your promise to your allies, and so increase your fame and strengthen your power. Even at the sacrifice of one's own interests and pleasure, one should carry out the business of one's friend according to one's promise. Only so can a king's authority and reputation grow. It will be best to fulfill one's promise before the due date. In any case, delay should be avoided. Fulfillment after the promised date is worse than useless. One should not wait to be reminded by one's friends of what had been promised to them. All this you know without me telling you. Remembering what Ram had done for us, we must take steps to fulfill our promise without waiting to be reminded by him. The rainy season is over. There's no ground for further delay. We can no longer postpone the task of searching for Sita. Ram may be very patient, but that does not justify any further delay on our part. Did not Ram kill your foe promptly, not minding the danger or the blame involved? We should fulfill our promise with equal promptness. Thus, politely, did Maruti convey his advice to Sugriva. That must be another name for Hanuman, Maruti. The latter accepted it, and thanking Hanuman, ordered Nila to mobilize the Vanara army. All the world must be searched and Sita found, he said. Order, therefore, the most powerful Vanaras to come and join us at once. Those who fail will be summarily punished. Having said this, Sugriva went back in to his private apartments. Ram and Lakshman spent the time in their cave waiting for the end of the rainy season and the fulfillment by Sugriva of his promise. But when the rains were over and the forest and its creatures shone with renewed beauty, Ram grieved intensely at the thought of Sita's suffering at the hands of the Rakshasas. The world is full of life and joy, said Ram, but Sita is in agony somewhere, and I still sit here awaiting the favor of this ungrateful Vanara king. Alas, she walked cheerfully through the Dandaka forest as if it were a palace park. She did not mind the stony ground and the thorns in the path. What must be her suffering now? But this king, drowned in his cups and reveling in the company of his women, has forgotten his promise to me. Lakshman, go at once to Kishkinda and tell this base king, know that the path still yawns open whereby the slaughtered Vali went to his doom. Do not follow him, but fulfill your promise to me. Ruin awaits him who forgets kindness and neglects friends. Beware of Ram's arrows. The 4 months of the rainy season are over. These 4 months were like 4 ages to Ram, but to you, steeped in pleasures, they have perhaps sped like minutes. By delay, you incur Ram's wrath and seek your destruction. Go, Lakshman, tell him this. This was the angry and impatient message Ram wanted Lakshman to take to Sugriva. Carrying this weight of his brother's grief and anger, Lakshman was about to leave. Then Ram thought again. He knew Lakshman's nature and feared danger from his rashness. So he called him back and said to him, in conveying my complaint to Sugriva, do not be harsh. Whatever his faults, he is our friend. Point out his faults to him, but say nothing harsh. Lakshman agreed, but he found it hard to control his own anger as he approached the gates of Kishkinda. Noting the severe face of Lakshman, who was fully armed, the Vanara sentry became alert and made ready to guard the fortress. This enraged Lakshman still further. Some Vanaras ran to the inner apartments and reported to Sugriva, Lakshman, furious with anger, is coming here bow in hand. We could not stop him. But the Vanara king was tipsy and surrounded by women, and he took no notice. The king's servants ordered the sentry at the gates to stand firm and prevent the entry of anyone. Lakshman's anger became quite uncontrollable. Lakshman forced his way in. There he met young Angada and thought of whose youth and misfortunes took away something of the edge of his wrath. My child, go and tell the Vanara king, he said, that Lakshman is waiting at the palace gate to have audience of him on behalf of his grief-stricken brother. Angada went accordingly to the king's apartment and informed him of Lakshman's visit. But Sugriva was in no condition to understand. Angada saw this and took counsel with the ministers as to what should be done. Hanuman and some of the fellow ministers gently explained what was happening, and Sugriva was at last aroused from his tipsy condition. Sugriva said, I am not at fault, am I? Why should my friends Ram and Lakshman be angry with me? Some enemy must have carried tales and set them against me. Hanuman answered, It is my duty, O king, to say these things, and I say them. Do not be angry with me. We have delayed in carrying out our promise to Ram. We have forgotten Ram's grief. It is late, but not too late. Hence, let us do quickly what we should. Let us seek forgiveness from Lakshman. Let us, without further delay, take steps to fulfill our promise to Ram. Then Sugriva agreed to receive Lakshman. As Lakshman went into the Vanara town, he marveled at its beauty and the culture of Kishkinda. Now, mindfully, these are very primitive peoples. They're kind of ape-like, Vanaras, but they are human, and but they're in a very primal form. It's almost like monkeys form. Passing through beautiful streets, he stood outside the king's palace. Hearing the sounds of revelry, of dance and song proceeding from within, he saw that Vanaras had forgotten their promise and were lost in enjoyment. He could hardly control his anger. Still, he held back from entering the women's chamber, and standing in a corner outside, he twanged his bowstring. The sound filled all Kishkinda with fear and trembling. Sugriva heard it, realized that the prince was indeed angry, He saw the danger and asked Tara to go and pacify the prince. A chivalrous man like Lakshman will find his anger slip from him when he speaks to a lady, and it will be impossible for him to continue wrathful, said the king, shrewd even in his tipsy condition. Tara advanced toward Lakshman. In looks, in knowledge of the world, and skill in speech, Tara was unrivaled. She said to Lakshman, after enduring for a long time poverty and persecution, Sugriva is enjoying the pleasures and the prosperity you have secured for him. This enjoyment has gone to his head. He's lost his senses. I know his fault, but you should forgive him. That high-souled, that knows the foibles and imperfections of our common nature, should temper their censure with compassion. So be not too harsh in judging of King Sugriva's surrender to the temptations of the flesh, especially after his long trials and privations. But I can assure you, he has never lost sight of his debt or his duty to you. He has already issued orders for mobilizing the Vanara warriors from all quarters. Today or tomorrow, they will all be here. Then the search for Sita and the war against Ravana will begin. Have no doubt. And now, pray come in and see the king. Lakshman now was no longer angry. He entered the apartment. Sugriva, descending from his seat, welcomed Lakshman. Forgive my faults, he said. With Ram's friendship and help, I am king today. How can I ever forget what I owe to the valorous and good Ram? We can destroy our foes without any help from me. He can destroy our foes without any help from me. I, with my armies, can only follow him, that is all. Surely Ravana will perish. The search for Sita will soon begin. Do forgive the delay of which I am guilty. Lakshman was pleased. Ram is your equal in honor and prowess, none else, he said. Come with me to Rishyamukha and give him words of comfort in his grief. Sugriva and Lakshman went in a litter to Ram, and explaining the arrangements already made satisfied him. Ram was pleased. He said, You indeed are a real friend, like the clouds yielding rain, the sun destroying darkness, and the moon pleasing human hearts. A good friend comes to one's help spontaneously. I am happy in your friendship. Now the end of Ram and his race is certain. Even as Ram was expressing his gratitude and joy, great multitudes of Vanaras, under their respective leaders, arrived and assembled. They came from distant forests, mountains, and coasts. The dust they raised darkened the sky. Millions of monkeys and bears in a variety of shapes and colors were there. Monkey-like. Sugriva addressed this enormous army and showed them their appointed camping places. Later, he divided the host into 8 divisions and sent each under its commander thoroughly to search in the 8 directions for Sita. One point is worth noting here. The Tamil poet Kamban describes Tara as a chaste widow living a life of discipline and privations. It's different in Valmiki, who includes Tara and the other women as part of the inheritance Sugriva won from Vali, in fact, as an appendage of the throne. When Sugriva lost himself in bodily pleasure and forgot his duty to Ram, Tara shared his revels and is described as being flushed and unsteady with wine when she went out at her lord's command to allay Lakshman's resentment. In ancient times, when an elder brother died, leaving a wife, there was a custom in royal and other noble families for the younger brother to take the widow as wife and protect her. It is difficult for people of one age to judge the customs of another age. Imagination and great flexibility of mind are needed to assess the merits and defects of usages with which we are not familiar. Yet it was also acceptable that if the brother was not able to conceive a child in his wife, then the other brother was asked to plant the seed in his brother's wife. So those things are forbidden in Kali. That's one of the 5 things that's forbidden in Kali Yuga. That and taking sannyas. But it's a different kind of sannyas that's being described for not taking in Kali Yuga. Sannyas for preaching is something else. It's a facility for preaching. It's not the kind of sannyas that's forbidden in Kali Yuga. It's a different kind of sannyas. You go off into the wilderness and no, but for preaching, we see Chaitanya, Bhaktisiddhanta, Srila Prabhupada, followers of Prabhupada. So that's a different kind of sannyas. Chapter 46, the search begins. Look, Ram, at this Vanara army, said Sugriva. All these myriads of wondrous strength are yours to command. They are willing and able to do you all the service you demand. Consider this huge army as your own and bid them to do whatever you wish. Ram, beside himself with joy, embraced Sugriva. He said, First, we should find out whether Sita is alive, and if so, where she is. Next, we should know Ravana's whereabouts. Then we shall do what needs to be done. But it is for you, not for me or Lakshman, to command this army. You are their king. Besides, you know best what needs to be done and how to do it. Blessed am I to have a friend like you and a brother like Lakshman. Then Sugriva issued stringent orders to commanders at once to send divisions of the army to the 4 quarters of the earth to make a thorough search for Sita. After sending away the other leaders, Sugriva took Hanuman aside and told him, Son of Vayu, possessing the strength and splendor of your father, you alone can succeed in this task. You have strength, courage, and intelligence, and on you I rely to take up and discharge this responsibility of discovering Sita. Son of Vayu, Vayu is the demigod of the wind, the air, the wind. Ram too felt that Hanuman's efforts would be crowned with success. Whatever obstacles turned up, he felt that Hanuman would find a way of overcoming them. He gave his signet ring to Hanuman and said, Take this ring. I'm full of hope that you will discover Sita. This ring will tell her that you are my messenger. Dear Hanuman, may you bring Sita and me together again. Readers should realize the solemnity and pathos of the scene. Ram, full of abiding trust in the devoted loyalty and valor of Hanuman, placed the ring as though it was his own hungry heart in his servant's hand. The ideal servant accepted the sacred trust with a deep reverence and unshakable resolve never to fail his master. Sugriva gave orders to his army. Sita must anyhow be discovered, no matter where she's hidden. You can and must find her. Within a month you must return with news of her. The army swarmed out like ants from an anthill and spread in the 4 directions. Satyabali and his army proceeded northward. Vinita went east, Shushena westwards. Hanuman, Angada, and General Tara traveled southwards. It's not Tara the queen, this is a different Tara, General Tara. All were equally enthusiastic and equally eager to catch and kill Ravana and redeem Sita. Each group was anxious to be first to return with success. There was tumultuous rivalry. Ram inquired of Sugriva, You describe every quarter and region of the earth like one who had seen the whole world with his own eyes. How and when did you see it all? You will remember, my lord, said Sugriva, how Vali pursued me in all directions. Wherever I went, he still pursued me, and so I had to wander over the face of the whole world. I I thus had occasion to see every part of this planet. Later, I learned about the spot where Rishi Matanga had built his ashram. If Vali entered that region, his head would go to pieces by the sage's curse. I knew that he would not come to that place, and he could not harm me, even if he came, so there I lay protected. The hordes that went north, east, and west returned in a month and reported that Sita was not to be found anywhere. Carefully we searched forests, mountains, rivers, cities, but nowhere could we find her. Hanuman, who had gone southwards as the lucky one, did not the Rakshasa carrying Sita also travel southwards? And Hanuman has not yet returned. Ram, hearing this, was satisfied that the Vanaras had done their best. Hanuman and Angada entered and searched the caves and forests of the Vindhyas. Then they came upon a desert where a rishi was performing tapas. By his curse, it was devoid of trees and plants and birds and beasts. Traveling further south, they saw a big Ashura, the cruel one, regarding the Vanara crowd as a good meal, sprang up to catch them. They thought at first that this was no other than Ravana. Angada rushed towards him and gave him a mighty blow. Unable to stand it, the Ashura spat blood, fell on the earth, and lay dead like a great hill. Rejoicing in the thought that Ravana was dead, the Vanaras searched the forest for Sita, but there was no sign of her, and so they carried the search elsewhere. Often they would be weary of their fruitless search and sit down in blank despair. At such times, Angada, Gandamanana, and some other leader would encourage them and make them resume the search. Many days were spent in this way, yet Sita was not to be seen, and they dreaded Sugriva's displeasure. Very far they traveled southwards in their search. Passing through a desert, fainting with hunger and thirst, they saw a cave from which issued a variety of birds full of the joy of life. The gentle breeze which came out of it covered them with the pollen of lotus flowers and filled them with fragrances. The Vanaras concluded, undoubtedly there was water where the birds and perfume came from, and the Vanaras formed a chain with linked hands and plunged cautiously into the dense darkness of the cave with hearts full of hope, though too parched with thirst even to shout. At long last, all of a sudden, light appeared, and they saw a lovely grove with streams of pellucid water and trees bowing under their wealth of fruit. Then they came to a city with streets paved with jewels set in gold and great palaces, beautiful as a dream. They went along, and then they saw an aged Tapasvi clad in the garments of a recluse and seated on a dark skin. The Vanaras trembled before the divine splendor of her face. Hanuman took courage to approach her. Bowing low before her, he said, "Salutations to you, mother. May we know who you are." Thirsty and tired, we entered the dark cave hoping for some water, and now we see that this unpeopled golden city with trees and tanks. We're afraid, lest this be a vain vision arising from the madness of too great sufferings. Explain all this to us and remove our fears. She answered, "How did you find your way into this cave? You will have plenty of fruits and drink here. This palace was built by Maya, the architect of the Danavas. He learned the art from Shukracharya. Long and happily did Maya live here, till he incurred the enmity of Indra, who slew him. Later, Indra gave this golden place to Hema, my friend. These buildings and parks are hers. At present, she has gone to the abode of the gods. But what is your purpose in coming here? Why did you weary yourselves wandering in the forest? First, eat, drink, and refresh yourselves, then tell me all about yourselves." They ate and drank and refreshed themselves and were happy. Then Hanuman explained to the ascetic the purpose of their wandering. Ram, the son of Emperor Dasarath, for some reason left his kingdom and lived in the forest with his brother and wife. Then a Rakshasa carried off Sita, the wife of Ram. The two went out searching for her. They made the acquaintance of Sugriva, the Vanara king, and became friends with him. He has sent us on this mission to search for Sita and find her for Ram. Our king fixed a time limit for us to return with a clue. We lost our way in the darkness of this cave, and the period is now over. Now we do not know what to do. Sugriva is a strict master. For failure to do his bidding within the time set, he is sure to visit us with the penalty of death. Swayamprabha, that was the name of the ascetic woman, said, Alas, you cannot by yourselves go out of this cave. No stranger enters it, can go out of it with life. But yours is a great mission, and I must, by my tapasya, transport you out. Now shut your eyes. Accordingly, they shut their eyes. All at once they found themselves on the seashore. Reaching the seashore, they looked around and they startled to discover that it was the beginning of spring. Angada lamented, Alas, the time has been transgressed. If we return to Kishkinda without any clue of Sita, the king will surely punish us with death. He hates me. It was under pressure from Ram that he agreed to make me Yuvaraj, not because of his love for me. Instead of going there and losing our lives, let us fast and seek death here and now. Many of his companions agreed with Angada. The Vanara general Tara said, I do not agree. Why should we end our lives? Let us return to the cave of the Tapasvini Swayamprabha and live there happily. There is everything in plenty there. Neither Sugriva nor anyone else can reach this spot or spend the rest of our lives free from care. But Hanuman said, What unworthy talk is this? What pleasure is there in eating, drinking, and sleeping in the cave, leaving our families in faraway Kishkinda? Sugriva is a good king. We need not fear. And if indeed Sugriva is angry with us and determined to punish us, how can this cave give us safety? Can it stand against Lakshman's rage? Will he not smash it to pieces and kill us? I see no benefit in Tara's counsel. Let us return and tell Sugriva the whole truth and beg for his forgiveness. This is the only way to safety. I do not agree with Hanuman, said Angada. Sugriva has no love or pity for me. He is sure to kill me. Sugriva had his father killed. His father was Vali, the other king. So Angada has this little hesitancy here. I mean, he killed his father, so. Sugriva has no love or pity for me. He is sure to kill me. He have a cruel nature. Remember how he killed my father. He does not want me to live. He will find some excuse or other for killing me. He regards me as an obstacle in his way, and that of his progeny, but for me would inherit Kishkinda. To break a promise is nothing to him. He did not forget his solemn pledge. Did he not forget his solemn pledge to Ram that he would search for and recover Sita? Was it not only for fear of Lakshman and his bow that he sent us on the search? My poor bereaved mother has succumbed to fear and accepted Sugriva's protection. She clings to life for my sake. Hearing that I am dead, she will end her life. I am miserable and know not what to do. My death is certain, he said. If I return to Kishkinda, it is far better to fast to death here. He spread on the ground the kusha grass in the manner prescribed for the vow of death, bowing to the gods and the dead, and sat facing east, determined to die. When Angada, the Yuvaraj, took his vow and sat in the posture of a fast until death, the other Vanaras cried in grief and resolved also to fast with him and die. They all sat facing east. From a neighboring hill, Sampati, the vulture king, saw this crowd of Vanaras resigning themselves to fate. Having lost his wings and being unable to move, Sampati had been famishing for a long time. He now rejoiced, saying to himself, So many monkeys are going to die here together. I shall have enough food for a long while without effort. Meanwhile, the Vanaras, expecting death, were recalling the past and talking to one another and loudly lamenting over all that had happened. Because of Kaikeyi, Dasarath died, they said. Because of Dasarath, Ram had to dwell in the forest. Ravana carried off Sita. The heroic Jatayu lost his life in an attempt to save Sita. If the heroic bird had strength enough to continue the struggle a little longer, Ram and Lakshman would have arrived on the spot and recovered Sita. By fate did all these things happen, and the end of the tale is that we are dying here. In what curious way does fate work? Listening to these lamentations, Sampati startled at the mention of Jatayu, who was his brother. Hearing him spoken of as dead, he naturally wished to hear the whole story. Sampati was very old. He and Jatayu were the children of Aruna, the god of dawn and brother of Garuda, Hari's vehicle. Jatayu and Sampati in their youth competed with each other as to who could fly higher and rise in the sky. As they approached the sun, the heat became intolerable, and Jatayu was about to be burnt up. But Sampati spread his wings and protected his brother from the fury of the sun. Jatayu was saved, but Sampati's wings were burnt off. Unable to fly, he fell down on a hill. Since then, he could not move, but stayed in the same place, ever hungry for a meal and just barely alive. Who brings sad news of my dear brother Jatayu? He cried in agony. Oh, Vanaras, is beloved Jatayu dead indeed? Why did Ram, son of King Dasarath, go to the forest? Why did he lose his wife? Was Jatayu killed by Ravana? Tell me all. The Vanaras had resolved to end their lives. The wingless old vulture had desired to make an easy meal of them, but now things turned out otherwise. The Vanaras got up, went to Sampati, and gently led him down from the hill. Then they talked and exchanged information. Sampati recounted his story. Angada related all that had happened in Kishkinda and asked old Sampati how Ram could be helped. Sampati was old and weak, but his eyes had not lost their keenness. He could see things very far off. He could see Sita captive in Lanka and described in detail the wealth of Ravana's kingdom. He saw and described how Sita sat surrounded by Rakshashis in Lanka. The Vanaras were wild with joy. They jumped about saying, now we know all about Sita. There's no need for us to die. Ram's purpose will be achieved. Sampati's troubles were also over. The boon he had received, that when he helped Ram he would get back his wings, came true. And even as they were talking, young feathers began to spring and grow on his sides. Sampati now shone with fresh beauty, and he found satisfaction in performing funeral obsequies for his brother Jatayu. Ramayana, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Oh my goodness. Hare Krishna. So we'll continue on. The next chapter, 47, is called Son of Vayu, and that will focus on Hanuman. Undoubtedly. Hare Krishna. Krishna Chaitanya.